Hi, everyone. Glad you could be here. It is Friday, November 11th, 2022. I'm Brett Nachman with College Autism Network, and this is our College Autism Network Virtual Association of Scholars, or Canvas meeting. This is our last one of 2022 as we get ready for the holidays in the forthcoming week. So we're glad you could allocate an hour of your time to be here with us, and we will have a great presentation ahead with Dr. Aylin Ulker and Tom Beeson discussing some of the cool research that they've been up to related to sensory inclusion in higher education, neurodiverse and neurotypical experiences and perspectives. We'll get to that in just a few moments. We know that many of you have been with us in Canvas before, and so we are going to encourage you, if you are in our meeting agenda, to please highlight your name to indicate that you are in attendance. And that's just a helpful thing on our end, just to document that you are here. And as I said, as always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat or turn on your microphone. You're welcome to do that. And as we begin, just a reminder that if you're not already on our Canvas listserv, to please go ahead and do that. That's where you'll stay apprised of our forthcoming Canvas meetings and recordings of our Canvas meetings. Complemented by various news and updates and resources that folks share as it pertains to autism and post-secondary education. You'll often notice that it is a space where folks share recruitment materials for studies that they're working on, as well as maybe occasionally share links to newly published articles and tools that the community may benefit from. We also encourage you, if you're not already an official quote-unquote CAN member, to support the work that we at College Autism Network do. You can see a hyperlink for that in the meeting agenda. At this point, we usually turn it over to all of you to share any resources that you would like to share with the community. So it could be a new article, something you learned recently about autism in higher education, news that you have to share about your program, or other interesting topics. This is a great space just to serve as a brief forum toward that end. So I'm not sure if anybody would like to chime in and do so, but you are welcome to.
I have a resource I'd like to share. I'm going to put it in the chat. College Autism Network has what we call the CAN Consultants Collective, and it's a group of practitioners and scholars who have expressed interest in working with other campuses, organizations that are perhaps looking to start a new program, to evaluate a program. So this link will take you to our database where you'll see the various consultants. And we facilitate the connection between you and them, but we are really excited to provide this service for anybody who is seeking that outside individual to come and share their wisdom on your campus.
Great, thanks, Lee. We're definitely excited to have that as part of our infrastructure of various CAN efforts. And we hope that you all look into that. Other things that folks want to share, I know that in the chat, Heather shared an article from the Times Higher Education on what universities can do to support their autistic employees. If you'd like, Heather, you're welcome to share your thoughts on it, but otherwise, glad to have that as a resource that we'll be sure to share out broadly. But feel free to go ahead if you like.
Thanks. Yeah, I was not in any way involved with this. I just sort of found it on the internet. I think point 2 is specific to the UK, but the rest seem relevant more broadly.
Great, thank you for sharing. Other folks are want to share anything? Well, I definitely want to let folks know about the upcoming Association for the Higher Education and Disability, or HEAD conference. That will be next summer. Folks might be interested in exploring that and determining if they want to go to it or submit a proposal. That's something to perhaps keep on your radar. Anything else? All right. Well, if there are other items, you're welcome to put that in the chat or contribute verbally. At this point, we are going to turn it over to our presenters for today. So we have Dr. Aylin Ulker, who is a recent graduate of Medical University of South Carolina. And we have Tom Beeson, Spectrum Program Coordinator at Clemson. So you probably will recognize both of them from our prior Canvas meetings over the months and years, and we're glad to have them talk today. We have a great conversation on sensory inclusion in higher education, neurodiverse and neurotypical experiences and perspectives. We'll have about roughly a half hour for the presentation, as well as time for Q&A. So feel free to put those comments and questions in the chat, and I'll turn it over to Aylin and Tom.
Thank you so much. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Are we good? Oops.
Looks good, Aylin.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for being here. We are very excited to share about the work that we've been doing really over the past couple of years as a part of my doctoral capstone while I was an occupational therapy student at MUSC. And I am now finally an occupational therapist and ready to work. So in the meantime, I'm really excited that I get to continue this work with Tom. So Tom, I will actually go ahead and change it to our next slide.
And I'll just introduce myself. Tom Beeson, and I coordinate the CUSP program at Clemson University, which is our enhanced support program for autistic college students. And I had the pleasure of working with Aylin over a 2-year period while she was in her doctoral program, and specifically working with her for a semester on campus, which is where she did most of her work with CUSP, which included directly working with students in the program, both kind of in a graduate student support capacity, and also she provided some instructional units on self-regulation for the most part. And then also working with her on a couple of research projects that were done, one prior to her on-campus experience and then continued during her on-campus experience. And then one that we started toward the end of her on-campus experience, and then it kind of has continued since then. So she's not only did her capstone work, but has been continually working on that research project since she's finished up her doctoral degree. So kudos to you, Aylin, for the long haul.
Thank you, Tom. So I will.
Yeah, so I'll do this one, Aylin. So just a little bit on Clemson. Clemson is a medium-sized R1 university in our rural upstate South Carolina setting. Clemson is kind of halfway between Atlanta and Charlotte, North Carolina, if that helps you locate us geographically. And we have about 2/3 in-state South Carolina students and 1/3 out-of-state students. The CUSP program is designed to provide enhanced supports for autistic students at Clemson. And right now we're about 30 students. At the time that Aylin was with us, we were about at 24 students. And then when she first started with us, we were about at 10 students. So it's changed a lot in terms of the size of the program, but not too much in terms of the composition of the program.
Yes, I believe the program is in its 4th year now.
Correct.
So I'm just going to start. So a couple of years ago was when we started this partnership between Tom and I, MUSC and CUSP. And I started off with some research, and then I took that research and developed a needs assessment and conducted that with the Spectrum program just to get a better idea of what some of the sensory experiences were of the students that were involved in the program at the time. This was right around COVID, so everything was virtual. And then I went into my capstone semester just this past spring, where I did get to meet everybody and be in the office and with the program and conduct interviews, a focus group. And we also sent out a survey to the Clemson University population. And at the very end, we're going to talk about what we're doing now and what some of our next steps are. So as far as the background goes, I knew that there were a couple of criteria that is important whenever it comes to diagnosing autism spectrum disorder, especially on the medical diagnostic side. And one thing that was added underneath the restrictive repetitive patterns of behavior criteria in the DSM-5 is that if the individual may present hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. And so what the sensory input is referring to is our sensory system, which we have our 5 main ones that we all know as far as our sight, auditory, touch, smell, and taste goes. And the 2 main ones that we typically would associate with autism is loud environments, so sound, and bright lights visually. But really what this hyper and hyporeactivity is looking at is, for some individuals, it may, if you're hyperreactive to sensory input, then when you receive just a little bit of sensory input, it may send you into it may be too much and maybe too overwhelming. Versus if you're hyporeactive, then you're underreactive. So it may take you a lot more sensory input to actually register the same amount of sensory input as would be neurologically typical. Then we also have 3 other ones. Proprioception is our awareness of our body in space. And this is really important, especially it's associated with like clumsiness if you have a underdeveloped or a poor proprioceptive system. Then we have our vestibular system, which is associated with balance, and this often helps us keep our posture upright and helps us understand where our head is in space. And it's stimulated through movements such as rocking, spinning, being upside down, and things like that. Then we have our interoceptive system, and this is the one that helps us understand what is going on with our bodies inside of us. So we can sense if our heart rate's racing and if we're feeling nervous, or maybe if we're hungry and need to eat something in order to kind of bring us back to where we need to be. So our interplay between this sensory system is really important when it comes to interacting with the world around us and how we respond to the world around us. So with potential sensory challenges, which is quite common in autism, as we mentioned in the previous slide, these sensory challenges can directly or indirectly contribute to many other different types of challenges, such as feelings of loneliness, socialization difficulties in stressful situations. They can lead to anxiety and depression. And all of this has this interplay that can ultimately also lead to a distraction from academics. And as we all know, there is a lot of autistic students do have struggles when it comes to academics, and there is a lower graduation rate among the autistic population. And although these sensory difficulties are a common characteristic of autism, they're typically not addressed by universities. There's really nothing in place to support students that have sensory challenges. The first needs assessment that I did with the program was conducted in the fall of 2020. This was, again, virtual at the time. I sent a red cap survey to the students that were in the program at the time. I believe it was about 10. We had 9 students respond. 7 of them were men, 2 of them are women. And I also had regular meetings with Tom, and where he got to share some of his observations, which we will discuss. But basically from the survey, what we gathered is that 66% of students most commonly identify noisy environments as impacting their living, learning, and socializing experience on campus. And the most top 3 negative settings that they identified at the time were the cafeteria, the classroom, and housing. And obviously these are places where you live, learn, and socialize. And Tom, if you could share some of your observations from that time when we were first discussing this project.
So I think one of my observations was that some of these things we obviously can have some control over, but often in university settings, if it's a classroom that has negative sensory characteristics, that may be very difficult to really impact, right? And I think it's also dorm space. We think of a dorm as, and maybe a dorm space as a place of refuge, but a number of students reported negative sensory input in terms of maybe a noisy air conditioning unit, or just weird smells, or other things that are often kind of very hard to have much control over. So two specific examples, Aylin.
Thank you very much. So we took this information from the needs assessment and went to work with what we wanted to do. So this is a lot of words on a slide. I don't want you to read all of this, but I will guide you through what I want to go over. So this past spring, I had the opportunity to conduct a focus group with the students that are in the Spectrum program. We ended up having our second year class participate in this focus group that had 4 men and 2 women. And then I also did 2 individual interviews with 2 other participants that were not in the second year, but were actually further along in the program. So they had been in the program longer, and they also contributed to these neurodivergent student perspectives. And we recorded these conversations with consent, of course, and they were transcribed. And so these are some of the quotes that I gathered from those conversations. And the main things that I would like to point out, kind of as we discussed, is the visual and auditory input is typically the biggest concern or the biggest complaint. In one of the main buildings, it's a newer building, echoes a lot. There's, if I'm looking down over here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but in the building, for example, the sound echoes a lot. If someone's talking to me and there's a lot of ambient noise, I cannot hear what they are saying, and I can't think. I can't hear myself think. And this is a student that not only would study in that building and attend classes in that building, but she also worked in that building. In the same building, there's glass walls everywhere. You can see everybody and everybody can see you, so it's not very private. Fluorescent lights were a major concern throughout the conversation. As you can see, seeing fluorescent lights as well as hearing the buzz of the lights. And then the student over here spoke specifically about the dorm, but we also heard about this issue in study rooms where the lights don't have a dimmer. You just turn the light on and that's what you get. You don't get to choose the intensity of the lights. Of course, other sounds such as places being very loud, parties, and things like that were a big concern. Another group of conversation that we had was, what does sensory inclusion mean to you? And I really enjoyed what this student over here had to say. It means including people who have sensory issues in a way that makes it so they are not isolated or they are not at a disadvantage. And I do believe that this kind of goes back to that literature review where sensory challenges can lead somebody to feeling isolated, feeling lonely, not being able to be in the space that is best supporting them. Again, being able to make it dim and providing quiet spaces for sound was very important to them. Regarding whether or not they would use a sensory space, we found that there was a positive response to this. They felt that they would use the space for things like an escape, for panic attacks, or just to be able to de-stress. And location-wise, I found that it would be good to have multiple of them because having just one would be pretty difficult to access. So having something that's central was very important to these students, and having something that was accessible was very important to them. Tom, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think that's good, Aylin. Okay.
So,
Oh,
no, I'm just going to say, so that concluded our kind of the conversation component of this. So I'll let you continue.
okay. So shifting gears, after spring break in, I guess, last semester, spring of 2022, we decided that we would kind of expand on what we've done with program students and do a broader survey. So we put together a Qualtrics survey to send out across campus, and it was sent out both through email and then, well, basically through email to 3 groups. One, we received email addresses from the Office of Institutional Research. We also sent an email with the survey link to students registered with Student Accessibility Services on campus. And then the Office of Access and Equity sent out a survey link to all of the people who subscribed to their listserv. So in total, it went out to approximately 950 faculty and staff at Clemson University and 4,300 students at Clemson University. Those numbers aren't specific because there would be some overlap there. We know exactly, well, we know who we got from the Office of Institutional Research, but there was certainly some overlap with registered students with SAS, and then we have no idea about the overlap with the names on the Access and Equity listserv. And so what you can see here is the survey respondents, 56% were undergraduate students, 13% were graduate students, 8% were faculty, 23% were staff. There's the gender identification there. And then we divided our respondents into 3 categories. A neurodivergent category, which included people who identified as having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ASD, sensory processing disorder, or dyslexia. A neurotypical category were people who did not identify with any of those categories. And then an other kind of identification category that are diagnoses or disorders or characteristics, but not commonly included under a neurodivergent kind of a label. Aylin, did you want to say anything more about that?
No, I think that sounded great.
Okay. I'll add that our response rate was low, of course. This survey went out to a lot of people, a lot of whom didn't have time for it or didn't have any interest in completing it. It also perhaps didn't help that this went out at the end of April, the beginning of May. So that was right at the the end of the semester, kind of crunch time, exam time. And so we were pleased with our response rate, even though those aren't like great response numbers.
Yes. So I kind of wanted to include this graph so you can see all the different diagnoses or identifications that we did receive, just to show that it's a variety of people that we really did get responses from. And when we put them into our 3 different groups, I'm going to show you kind of some of the stats that we got from there. So for our neurodivergent group, well, first let me just orient you here. So we have our neurodivergent group, our other group, neurotypical group, which is the assumption we made since they did not identify with any of the categories and they did not enter in any other identification. And then we have all the respondents here, which was our 503 responses that we got. So out of this, you can see that the majority of our neurodivergent group that responded were students, and the majority of our neurotypical group that responded were employees. I mean, out of the three groups, employees were most in the neurotypical group is what I mean. And we had this is weird. Tom wanted me to add this, but we had one person that identified as vaccinated instead of identifying in a gender because they just wanted to be funny, I guess. I'm not sure. And then what you can see here is that when asked whether or not they would be likely to use a sensory space on campus, if it were available, the group that was most likely to use a sensory space would be the neurodivergent group. The group that was most unlikely to use a sensory space was our neurotypical group. And when you look at the population as a whole, it was about 2/3 that would use this space. And underneath, since we wanted to draw that connection that sensory experiences may serve as a barrier to education, we did ask that question as well. And the neurodivergent group was the most likely to find that negative sensory experiences affect their academics and their education. The neurotypical group was the least likely to find that. However, I want to remind you that this was also had the most employees out of all of these. So perhaps that had a factor. Overall, about half of our respondents found that sensory experiences have some impact on education. And we did define sensory space when we were asking about whether or not they would use a sensory space as a location on campus that serves as a safe space to visit in order to recenter yourself in however you may need to, because there is no one size fits all when it comes to a sensory space. So we're really just asking them, like, in your ideal sensory space, if there was one available, would you use it? And then when we ask the question, describe your ideal sensory space, these are the primary words that came out. And the two most common words that were used were quiet and lighting. So again, going back to those being the two main complaints when it comes to sensory experiences, those are two things that are kind of smash in the face. Like if the lighting is too harsh or if it's too loud, then it's going to affect you. We found that those two were the most commonly noted characteristics among all three groups. So this is the responses from everybody, but among all three groups, those were the two main things that they would look for when it comes to a sensory space, along with having a natural environment, kind of soft lighting, neutral colors, comfortable seating, just lots of characteristics here that kind of can help you envision what our population is looking for when it comes to a sensory space. Then finally, when we asked where would they want to find a sensory space if there was one available on campus, the most common space that we basically coded a bunch of written responses into these categories: community spaces, academic buildings, outdoor areas, workspaces, living spaces. And then universal design is just implementing it in a universal design type fashion. And some people were just not interested or not sure. So community spaces, which included various central buildings around campus, were included here. And the most common response was actually 33% of the community spaces was the library, identified as the most preferred location. Tom, do you have anything? Because I think I took your slide.
I think that's good.
Okay, sorry about that.
So a big goal of the research was to kind of push or drive a bit of an agenda on campus and to have something to present to different people or entities on campus about the need for more attention to the sensory aspects of the campus environment. And so we're really pleased that we have gotten some traction across campus. Athletics actually had already started to talk about making their athletic events more sensory inclusive. So it's important to say that this involves kind of mitigating negative sensory experiences at sporting events. And they had partnered or are partnering with a group that a lot of, I think, athletic teams and other larger organizations are partnering with Culture City to design some more sensory friendly and to provide environments, but also provide sensory reducing kind of materials to attendees at athletic events. So that's already ongoing, and they're interested in doing more with that. And we're in close, reasonable contact with them in terms of periodically reaching out and making sure that we're working in concert. With Clemson Home, we've talked with them initially about pursuing some sensory-friendly dining locations on campus, and they're in discussions with Aramark about what that might look like. And then since the library was the place where people thought, hey, this is the place where this makes the most sense, or this is already fairly sensory friendly, so having some even spaces that were definitely sensory friendly in the library would be great. We reached out to them and said, hey, what could you do? And so their initial response has been to create, or in the process of creating, 1 study room and 4 study cubbies that are going to be designated as sensory friendly study spaces. So that was very much appreciated. And hopefully those are already kind of started and will be kind of finalized over the course of this academic year.
Yes, and what I believe that they're hoping to do, not just like slapping a name and saying like, oh, this can be sensory friendly, but they have ordered some supplies, which is great as far as some furniture and tactile items. And I believe that they're working on a tactile wall. So they are working on incorporating some of these characteristics into these spaces. And it's going to be a just a new process, and hopefully we can get that marketing and get some feedback on those so that we can further evaluate them and improve them. So this is very much in the beginning stages, but we are very excited that the library has come on board with this initiative.
So some next steps. One, we kind of have started this with students while Aylin was on campus, but getting feedback from students and others about spaces at Clemson that are, in their estimation, more sensory friendly, and trying to maybe develop that into some kind of map or resource for people that they might be able to use if they needed to seek out spaces that were more comfortable, so to speak. We mentioned that creating more sensory friendly zones across campus, not just in the library, but looking at other buildings and designating spaces that were designed to be and maintained as sensory friendly zones. And then just promoting a broader awareness and acceptance of people's sensory differences. And really pleased that even though Aylin will be moving on, has moved on, that Madison will be joining, has already joined the program. and will be working directly with me on campus in spring of 2024 to both do some new things and also continue some of the work that Aylin started last spring and before that.
Yeah. So that has been our project so far.
And we'll now kind of yield to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aylin and Tom. That was really captivating, and we have some questions starting up with Lee, who puts in the chat, have you sensed any reluctance or pushback from those who find high energy, high noise activities to be central to the sense of community at Clemson?
I have not received that. I've read through quite a bit of responses in our, hold on one moment, I'm gonna stop this share real quick. I read quite a bit of the responses, and I actually did not see anybody saying that that would take away from the Clemson campus spirit, so to say, or the feeling of being college students, because it's just adding a few features, perhaps taking away a few features, but mostly, if anything was taken away, they would be in designated spots. So it would not take away from the overall campus culture.
Appreciate the context. Tom, were you going to add something there?
Well, Lee, I think you might be talking about, say, orientation activities or kind of big student activities. Is that kind of what you were thinking? Football. Yeah. That's kind of where the athletics partnering with Culture City is trying to, they're trying to provide a way to reduce some of the kind of aversive sensory experiences that people might have going to those events. However, it's a bit like, I don't know, putting lipstick on a pig, perhaps. I mean, or a pig skin, perhaps. I don't know that there's a whole lot they can do. They just installed a huge monitor that is the third largest stadium monitor in the NCAA. That's by and large just a negative sensory experience in general for a lot of people. As far as orientation goes, I'm really pleased to say that we're going to have our own orientation ambassador for students next year. And our hope is that by having an orientation ambassador that might be more sensitive to student needs, that they can help kind of minimize the negativity of some of those experiences for students, or at least help those students participate to the level that they're able to and comfortable with, rather than just perhaps avoid them entirely because they're just worried that it would be unpleasant or not to their liking in some way.
I have two thoughts to add on to that. So not necessarily something that Clemson may be doing yet, but some other things that I've seen through my research that other universities have done, if anyone is looking for ideas or suggestions, is a sensory-friendly orientation day. Perhaps a couple of days that are marked in the calendar that people can specifically sign up for. And the second thought was also, okay, not if there is like a particularly loud event that is happening on campus, I have heard the idea of sensory-friendly alerts that people can sign up for. And that way people can at least have an idea of where on campus to try to avoid if they do not want to be in a large crowd or around a loud environment. So those are a couple of ideas that I have had the chance to kind of present to some of the individuals on at the Clemson campus, and just a few things that I've seen people doing.
All really good strategies here. Another question emerged from my way. What about dormitories? Are there any plans to improve the design or furniture?
I would say we don't have any plans for that at this point in time, that's something that can be looked at. And we certainly have had discussions with Clemson Home around overall making things a little more sensory inclusive. But right now have not gotten into that kind of specifics.
I'm going to throw it out there to the audience for a moment to kind of encourage some conversation around this. Are any of your campuses utilizing some of the strategies that Tom and Aylin have referenced today? Because we recognize that all of you are across a variety of different colleges and spaces around the country. Do any of these resonate with you, or are there additional ones that you might throw in the mix? Perhaps folks are.
It looks like there's one comment that one of
Yeah.
the universities in Canada has organized something similar with a neurodiverse specific orientation program. So that's very encouraging. Maybe we'll have to learn from y'all and how to make that work. Looks like there have been some sensory rooms in residence halls. I think that's a very incredible opportunity. And I've seen a few, like, again, through my research, different universities doing some things like having a neurodiverse hall. Yes, actually, that's a great idea.
Jane, I also have a question about that. Was that taking dorm space away from students? I could see that would be a non-starter at Clemson, or was it more making lounge space that already existed more sensory friendly or inclusive?
We've done everything on different campuses, Tom. We've used abandoned utility closets to create sensory spaces. We've used pipe and drape to cordon off a piece of a lounge.
Okay.
For Southern, or let's say Southwest colleges, we've used outdoor spaces, that places that had better weather than we have here in Connecticut, that you could create a sensory space outdoors. So we've used anything where we could find a space on campus. And if we couldn't find a permanent space, we did temporary space, like before exams or during exams.
These are all really good to hear. I saw in the chat a few moments ago that Elinor had their hand raised. And then I see Laurel has their hand raised as well. So feel free to chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, hey, I kind of put it down again because we were still talking about the sensory spaces, and I was just going to say very quickly about there was some discussion around the transitions, not the transitions, like the orientation stuff. I'm based at the University of Portsmouth in the UK, and I did some research where I was talking to autistic students as well as like disability staff. And the staff especially had a lot of different types of events that they were doing to ease orientation for autistic and, well, I mean, other neurodiverse people, as well as people who struggled with the sensory challenges. One of my participants actually said that Freshers Week, or like the orientation weeks where you've got, you know, like all the activity fairs and things like that, he called it a sensory assault for autistic people. And so I know that some universities will do things like specific transition events. So they could be a one-day thing, they could be residential, where sometimes it's targeted at any students with disabilities. Sometimes it's mainly targeted at autistic students, but they can all like come into the uni just like in a much smaller group, and they can meet all the relevant teams. So they would be able to meet like counselors as well as mentors, disability staff. Sometimes there's representation from the academics, and they would do like introductory lectures or like mock lectures to give them an idea of what uni would be like. And so the idea would be that the incoming students would be able to see all the different parts of like freshers fairs and activity fairs, but on a much smaller and calmer scale than if they had to attend all the orientation stuff. So even if they didn't go to those big, like, you know, uni-wide events in the first week, they wouldn't be missing out on the information. But of course, then there's that discussion of like not it being a little bit harder for them to form social connections, because a lot of people do meet through those kinds of events. But yeah, I guess just finding that balance has been still kind of tricky, depending on the uni as well. And it of course depends on resources.
Yeah, thanks for contributing there, Ellen. Or it's, I think we hear time and time again how useful it is to ease the transition into college, and it sounds like that's definitely an illustration of that. Other thoughts or questions emerging from folks could be a continuation of what you all have implemented on your campuses, or if there are additional ideas or thoughts that you have from the presentation.
I have this is Laurel. I'm at the University of Oregon. And I have a question certainly for presenters, if you're willing to share, or anyone else. Forgive me if you already answered it. It is just around, I guess, strategic roles to communicate the needs with at institutions that may not be yet prioritizing needs of disabled and neurodivergent students and staff. And currently at University of Oregon, I'd say that things happen because we have allies in different units and we know each other. And so we might say, hey, you know, can you like push for this in the libraries, for example? But at institutions that haven't yet had a kind of consolidated push for the kinds of things that you all are doing, are there folks that have been most important to be educating or aligning with, or roles that you've really wanted to be able to, I don't know, I'm babbling, but if there are strategic roles or folks that have been really key in expanding this across campus, I'd love to hear more.
So I'm going to let you answer this one. I would say that for me as a capstone student, I was very intimidated by approaching most people, but I have had quite a few contacts at Clemson through Tom.
Hi, this is Lauren from University of North Texas in Denton. And I know that we really started a lot with our Dean of Students, just because a lot of our, not a lot, but some of our students, they knew fairly well. So when we came with some solutions or ideas and things like that, they were very, very receptive. And kind of getting that level of administrative of the administration working for us was fantastic, was actually kind of pivotal.
Thanks for sharing, Lauren. It sounds like that, yeah, that administrative buy-in makes such a big difference. I see in the chat, Lindsay has a question. Are you planning to approach the library again to potentially find a space that is not related to studying?
So I think we will, but they were so receptive and open to the idea that I really, and have kind of taken initiative with it, that I don't want to ruin that by being either too pushy or seeming unappreciative about what they're initially willing to do. So yes, but probably waiting on that. There are a few other buildings that are under renovation that I think we need to kind of look at as places for lounge space or social space that might be designated as sensory friendly.
I have a feeling that the university may want to see some of the outcomes from what we currently have going on at the library before investing in other avenues, but I believe that there are quite a bit of different ways to incorporate this as you mentioned.
If folks have additional questions, now is going to be a good time to pop them in. I'll throw one in as there's a bit of a pause right now. So you mentioned that 49 of the participants identified as having an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. I guess I'm wondering, were there any questions that you all incorporated in the assessment and the survey to gauge how they were engaging with sensory stimuli in college versus other settings that they've been a part of in the past, right? Because we know that it's a much different environment than other spaces they may have occupied.
We did not have a question that compared their college experience with previous experience, but that is an excellent question. So thank you for sharing that. Hopefully we can find out more about that in the future.
Yeah, no worries. That's the problem with surveys and assessments. We can only ask so much. So
yes, and we ask quite a bit. There is still more data to analyze. This is just a portion of it that we were able to have prepared to share with you today. But that is an excellent question that we did not consider.
are you all seeking to publish this anywhere or submit this to a conference? I imagine that at least in this space, folks are very engaged and interested.
So some of this has been presented at a lectureship earlier this year that was more OT based. And some of this will be presented at the South Carolina Occupational Therapy Conference coming up in February. It was accepted for the American Association of Occupational Therapy as well. However, it's not going to be presented this coming year, but hopefully in the future. And I am very hopeful to publish this. I just think that might take some time.
Well, clearly folks in the space would like to see it out there even more. Give a moment if there's any final questions, but just want to create space if there's one final thing on someone's mind. Alrighty, well, if anybody wants to stick around, I'm sure Tom and Aylin could be here for a few more moments, but thank you both for joining us today and contributing this presentation, and what a model you all are demonstrating in terms of exploring sensory overload and ways to mitigate that, ways to be more inclusive in that manner on the Clemson campus and hopefully beyond. So really appreciate you being here. And
Thank you, Brett, and
Thank you.
Ken.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity.
well, we're glad to have you close out our 2022 Canvas meetings. And a reminder to folks that we will be back. We're not going anywhere. We're just taking a bit of a holiday break, but we'll see you all back here in January. In the coming weeks, we will share information about our schedule for the spring, including specific dates and details of our speakers as they are lined up. So we look forward to you being back here very soon. And in the meantime, to continue engaging with us on the Canvas listserv. And we all wish you a happy weekend ahead and a safe and wonderful holiday season too. Thanks.